everyone. My name is Raphael Bostic. I'm the director of the Bedrosian Center, and I guess technically the host for today. The Bedrosian Center is, that thing is bubbling. The Bedrosian Center has had the good fortune to be able to fund some research by faculty here, and as part of that funding, all the recipients have agreed to do a presentation to give us an update on where their project is standing. So today we're going to hear from an interesting project about homeownership and homeownership participation in China. The notion of homeownership is an interesting one, thinking about China and what that means, and I'm sure you guys will be talking about that. The presenters are Terry Cooper, Weijie Wang, and Wang. I didn't kill your names too much, I hope. And thank you guys, and I will turn the floor to you.
Good, thank you. So, welcome to this presentation on From Subjects to Citizens. This stream of research began in 2004. I was invited to Renmin University in Beijing to give a lecture on our research on the neighborhood councils that Juliet Musso and Chris Ware have been doing for about 10 years. At the end of my presentation, a member of the faculty there, Professor Chen Yu Hong, approached me and she said, "That's very interesting. Would you like to see my research?" And I said, "Well, what's it about?" "Well, the Homeowners Association movement." And I thought, well, I don't know whether that's very interesting or not, but I have to be courteous. So I said, "Yes, of course." So I went to her conference room. She began to show me a PowerPoint, and my jaw dropped. What she was showing me began to look very much like the civil rights movement that I had been deeply involved in here in the United States in the 60s. So we engaged in a conversation. She asked me if I would collaborate with her. I agreed to do so. So I began visiting China once or twice a year and meeting with groups of homeowner association leaders for about a day at a time, and hearing their stories and engaging them in discussion about those stories. In 2007, Professor Chen Yu Hong and I agreed to co-organize and co-sponsor a conference for the Homeowner Association leaders. I think this was the first major conference for those leaders. We had about 160 Homeowner Association leaders and some scholars from around Asia. And I led a group of 10, mostly from USC, but some from other parts of the US and from Cardiff University in Wales. So we participated in that conference. At about the same time, one of our doctoral students, Wang or Wang Feng, was doing her dissertation on this homeowner association movement. And she completed that dissertation in 2008. She's now an assistant professor at Shanghai University of Finance and Economics and doing very well. So that dissertation served her very well. Weijie is also doing his dissertation on this movement and moving well along on that. This latest project that was funded by the Bedrosian Center is focusing on how these homeowner associations are perceiving their role in local governance. And we're looking at the ways in which they may be emerging from the role of subject in an authoritarian society to the role of citizen, a more active kind of role. We were in Beijing September 19th through the 30th doing interviewing. Since I do not speak Mandarin, Weijie and Wei were doing most of the interviewing, but I participated in some of the meetings where English was spoken that I could participate in. I held a meeting in the Homeowner Association leaders again to kind of get updated on what they were doing. We'll be back again in late May to continue our interview. So this is a kind of progress report on where we are at this time. And Wei and Weijie will be presenting the slides.
Oh, okay. Hello, my name is Hui Li. So I'm a second-year doctoral student in Price in policy track. So our research is about homeowners association. specifically, we're focusing on how homeowners' participation in these organizations transforms local governance in Beijing. So here is the outline of the presentation. Okay. So why this study? So we have learned that citizen participation is particularly important in sustaining democracy. Traditionally, associations are viewed as schools of democracy. Putnam argues that participation can help nurture social capital, while social capital can make democracy work. Communitarianists emphasize that participation in the neighborhood is a form of strong democracy. So we were wondering whether participation can foster democracy in authoritarian states where people have very limited experience in participation. So let's turn to the biggest authoritarian states in the world, China. So we learned that China has experienced dramatic social change and rapid economic development in the past 3 decades. So many things are changing. In the housing domain, the Chinese government initiated a comprehensive housing reform in the 1990s. So before the housing reform, housing was provided by local government agencies or state-owned enterprises. So it's regarded as social welfare. But after the housing reform, a real estate market was eventually established. So people have to buy their own houses. But houses in China are very expensive. According to some source of data, we found that the ratio of housing price to annual household income is about 10 in LA, but it's over 30 in Beijing. So people have to spend a lot of money on their properties. So they are paying special attention on that. However, due to lack of laws and regulations, these homeowners oftentimes find that their property rights are violated by other organizations. So although the first property law was issued in 2007, 10 years after the establishment of real estate market, many problems still exist. So these problems include incomplete construction, housing quality problem, increase of property management fees without discussion or negotiation with these homeowners, or some neighborhood crime, poor services. So these homeowners are very angry. They started to organize themselves and found their associations to effectively protect their rights. So they found their homeowners associations, or we can call HOAs. So HOAs are unique in the sense that they are a type of self-governing civic organizations in China, which is a very rare case. HOAs are not isolated in the neighborhoods, which is very obvious. They like to achieve their collective goal, which is to protect their rights. They have to strategically manage their relationships with government, property management firms, and developers. So they have very severe conflicts. So the conflict starts from property rights because it's undefined. When there are no HOAs, PMFs, like property management firms, and developers, they gained a lot from renting communal properties without compensating homeowners. So they are the main beneficiaries from the property rights. Government agencies can also gain benefit from this situation because property management firms and developers are bribing them, and also they sometimes directly infringe property rights of these homeowners. So when homeowners start to organize themselves to found their associations and start to claim their rights, these three parties find that our interests are like threatened by homeowners association. So these three parties started to form alliances to like stop HOA's organizing. So for example, in this neighborhood, property manager says, like honestly, there are many government agencies here in around our neighborhood. Like how can you not give them a treat on festivals? How can you not send several boxes of mooncakes on the Mid-Autumn Day? So we can see that like property management firms, developers, and government agencies, they are colluding with each other to fight with homeowner association. So homeowner association are in bad situations. So as Professor Cooper has mentioned, we have been interested in this project for a very long time. So we have many interesting questions to ask. But for this small project, we are focusing on two research questions. The first one is, how does participation in HOAs facilitate citizenship? The second is a larger question. It's like, will the homeowners stop fighting when their rights are protected? How does this participation transform local governance? To answer these questions, we went to Beijing last September. We stayed there for 10 days. So we went to 10 neighborhoods and talked to 12 interviewees. They include homeowners, activists, government officials, and property managers. So we transcribed the data and translated from Chinese to English. So for each interview, it lasts about like 1 hour to 3 hours. So it's very intense. So this map shows the location of these 10 neighborhoods. We can see that they are spread out in Beijing. This table shows the characteristics of these neighborhoods. So we can see we intentionally choose a variety of communities, including condos, townhouses, or single-family houses. So for the housing price, it ranges from like $2,500 to over $8,000 dollars per square meters. So for the neighborhood size, it ranges from over like 200 households to over 5,000 neighborhoods, which is very large in China. To analyze the data, we use constant comparison method. We also use NVivo, a qualitative software to code for our coding purposes. So this is part of our coding scheme. We have many codes, but we didn't present all of them. So this is part of our codes. We have 3 big categories like motivations, why do they participate? Collective action, how do they organize themselves? What kind of problems do they have? So we have their interactions with external actors like government agencies, property management firms, and the professional consultant. So here comes our juicy part, our findings. What do we find? How does participation change people? Does participation help facilitate citizenship? So first, we need to define what is citizenship. Well, from a legal perspective, citizenship is defined as rights. Well, ethical perspective had a larger conceptualization. It not only includes rights, but also includes responsibilities and obligations. So in our analysis, we use this broader view of citizenship. So in literature, we learned that participation is a training ground for citizenship and civic competence. It helps generate capacity for collective action. It also can provide local knowledge for policy making. So in our analysis, we find that participation in HOAs does help homeowners develop their citizenship in terms of 3 dimensions. So the first one is to help them acquire democratic skills, including holding meetings, like making decisions, writing letters to the government, and negotiating skills. So usually homeowners started their participation from very passive mentality. So they don't know, or maybe we can call it authoritarian personality. We didn't put it here because we need to further understand authoritarian personality. But anyway, it's kind of a personality of whether we can question the government, whether government can make mistakes. So in our interview, one homeowner says, like many homeowners in our neighborhood are always asking themselves this question, like, can we question the street office? Can we question the residence committee? Can they make mistakes? So through their participation, this kind of question eventually are resolved. They learned that government can make mistakes sometimes, so they take a variety of actions to impose pressure on government. For example, they initiate demonstration. They file lawsuits to the government. So another skill of learning process is how to hold meetings, which seems very easy, but it turns out to be very difficult. In our interview, we oftentimes heard that, like, we have a lot of difficulty in holding meetings. For example, in this neighborhood, they have 9 people in their HOA board. They've said, like, our 9 people always have 9 different ideas. We don't know how to hold meetings and reach decisions. In another neighborhood, this homeowner said, our HOA cannot even work effectively. We can't hold meetings because we are always quarreling. So to resolve this issue, they are learning what? They are learning Robert's rule of order, which is very surprised, which we are very impressive by this, like Robert's rule of order. So we also went to observe several of their meetings, and we found it's very smooth. It's very well organized. It went very smoothly. So another outcome of their participation is the improved awareness of rights. So many homeowners said, we have a better understanding of property rights now. So when we first moved in our neighborhood, we thought our rights are just within the walls. But eventually we learned that we have rights on many things, like parking lots, like lawns, like public spaces in the neighborhood. They are all our communal property rights.
Excuse me.
Yes?
How did you conclude this? Like what, so you did 12 interviews.
Yes.
And how much information did you need to take from those interviews to draw this conclusion? I mean, was this true in all 12 sites, or did you see it in 7 of 12? And how strong were the comments to suggest this?
Yes, this is a very good question. We thought of this. We thought to put a table to like list all the 12 neighborhoods and then list how does this phenomenon happen in which neighborhoods. But due to time limitation, we are not able to put this, but it's very common in our interview. We read the memos, we coded the memos for several times, and then we wrote several summaries of these interviews. We found that it's very common in these neighborhoods. So for example, in this neighborhood, she said, I thought paying property management fees is just like paying taxes. We have nothing to do with it. But through their participation, they eventually realized that we are paying property management fees to enjoy better services. So we have the right to question the property management firms. So this improved awareness of rights does not only occur to these activists. It's also diffused from these activists to ordinary homeowners. For example, this homeowner said even the senior people in our neighborhood, whose daily job is just taking care of their grandchildren, she knows we have many rights. She has the awareness of rights now.
Can I have another question?
Yes.
So which rights did they not know they had?
didn't know like parking lots were theirs. They didn't know like lawns or public spaces in the neighborhood were theirs. They just know like the walls, like this is our apartment, this is just our rights. The elevators or the public facilities are not ours.
So this is the more the common spaces and
Yes.
and mutual areas.
Yes, this is related to their communal property rights.
It begins, and when you engage in these, I mean, I've been engaging in these conversations with homeowners leaders for several years now, and it seems to emerge when they buy the condominium, sight unseen, based on a floor plan. Then when they move in and they find out that what they bought is not what they got, so they begin to wonder, what right do I have to object to this? So they begin to talk to each other about that. And then once they begin to think about their ownership of that condominium, they may come home one day and find that other cars are parked in their parking spaces. And when they begin to question that, they begin to discover that the property management firm controlled by the developer has rented out their parking spaces to businesses in the neighborhood and pocketed the revenue and shipped some out to the government and some to the developer. So they begin to wonder about those common spaces then. So they begin to talk to each other about what right do we have to object.
Can I add something? Yeah, I think these condo neighborhoods are very different from single family houses because they share a lot of things, right? Common walls, common stairways.
Elevators.
So these things, yeah, elevators. So these things are usually not very well defined. So when the homeowners buy their apartments, they thought, we just have this apartment, nothing else is ours. But they soon realized that, okay, since we buy this condo, we have a lot of shared properties that is undefined, that is using by like property management firms or developers. They don't give us just a compensation. So this become the rules of the
But it is more complicated, right? So here, sometimes when you rent an apartment, you get a spot with the apartment, and sometimes you don't. If you buy in a condo, sometimes the condo comes with 2 spots in the garage, sometimes it comes with 0.
Right.
What kind of contracts and leases were there associated with these, and were these things called out as clearly you control them, or were they just absent from any kind of discussion?
Yeah, I think it's not very well defined. If you consider the housing real estate market was established like 10 years ago, so all these things are still developing. So many of these contracts are not specific to in terms of which belongs to which this parking lots, does it belong to developers or belong to homeowners?
Right,
so many of the things are not very well
So
defined.
when I buy, so I'm just keep going with this.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
so when I buy a home, I'm going to become a homeowner in one of these condo buildings, the contract says nothing about the parking spaces.
Oh, it's not very clearly defined. So the
So what
developer,
does that mean?
Is
Is
it
it,
maybe-
absent or?
yeah, I mean, is it absent or because you could imagine there are 3 cases.
Mhm.
One, when you buy this, you get 2 spots, right, clear. One, when you buy this, you are only buying the unit and you have no claim on anything else.
Right.
And then the third is, I'm buying it and the building has other things in it, and that's all that it says.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
Is it the third or is it the second?
I think it's, let me give you an example about the bomb shelters in Beijing. These bomb shelters, it's legally undefined. Okay, in each neighborhood, each apartment building, there are these bomb shelters. They're used as bomb shelter during wartime. But in peacetime, it's used as parking lots. But in all the property laws, there's nothing about these things. They are there, but it's not defined. So developers are claiming that we invest, so they are ours. Homeowners say, okay, this is our apartment building, so these bomb shelters parking should belong to us. So it's not defined, undefined. Also,
I'm still
cases.
struggling with this. So the bomb shelter
Mhm.
it seems to me to be different because that is a public facility
Mhm.
for an emergency situation.
But it's
that
the parking space.
Yeah.
That's where they park, in the bomb shelter.
in these so all right. So let me just make sure. Right.
Are you in the market for a Beijing or a Shanghai?
Huh?
Are you in a market for a?
I may be sure. Right? So when you buy an apartment, the building will have some bomb shelters in the basement.
Yeah.
And the question is,
Every building has to have one.
and the question is, who controls that space? And there's nothing that's stated about this.
Yes.
Yes.
So why isn't it just first one there gets it? I mean, that's how it's playing out? I mean,
And that's where the contention is, who owns that, because it's not clearly spelled out. Same thing with the gardens. The garden space, you know, they will come home and find out that the developer, or the property management firm rather, has rented out the garden space for a wedding or a party or something like that. And they begin to think of that as their space. So the contention is, who owns this space? What are our property rights? That's what.
I know this isn't the topic of this presentation. I'll shut up in a second. But how is this adjudicated? Right? I mean, there's not a
Sometimes people are simply beaten up. In the first PowerPoint that Professor Chin showed me, you see a guy going into the property management firm office to complain about something like this. There's a car in out of space, or there's a party going on in the garden that I usually sit in and have my tea. And then you see him running out with 4 or 5 guys behind him, club beating into the ground. So that's one way it's adjudicated.
You could call that adjudication.
Another way is in the courts, and some of them are winning their claims and some are not.
Another example is that we went to one neighborhood. This neighborhood said, well, when we were signing the contract, you said, in your plan, you said you have a lake.
Right.
But when we were moved in, the lake, where's the lake? The lake is missing. So they were trying to argue with the developers, but the developer said, we just changed the contract. Also they argue that, oh, we bought 90 square meters, but how come our apartment is just 80 square meters with the other 10 square meters missing? Why?
Isn't that a basic breach of contract?
Here it would be.
Right.
Here it would be.
Yeah.
You see, the way this whole thing works is
So
that
this just seems like a...
here you have developers investing some of, it's
Yeah.
really strange.
Good luck.
Right.
Yeah.
So here you have developers investing some of their own money in a development, right? And then selling the condos. There, the developers invest very little of their own money. They aggregate the money from the homeowners. Then they build the development. They sell these condos before the thing is even built, based on a floor plan and some
Right.
artist renderings. And so then when people come to move in, they're stuck with what they
Too late,
got.
so it was done is done.
Yeah.
So
This is called pre-sale system.
you're thinking of a society in which there's a rule of law. You know, that's not the case.
It's a little different.
And also people have very low awareness of contracts. They are very excited when they are buying their property, so they didn't look exactly what the contract says. They just believe that, oh, it should be right. But they didn't know there are many problems in it.
Two other questions. No, let me ask the other question first. So are we
So you
seeing...
want to buy a condo or no?
I'm getting a little more nervous. Are we seeing the emergence of like advocacy groups and coalitions that are
That's what
trying?
these are.
These are property specific, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm asking sort of a broader meta movement sort of
Yes.
thing, where you'd start to see, explicit lobbying to higher levels of government to try to fix
Second part
this.
of the presentation.
Oh,
Part of the reason.
I'm sorry, I'll shut up then.
No.
Go ahead.
So, okay, this is that. So the last dimension of their citizenship is a sense of community and responsibility. So many homeowners were very persistent even in dire situations. They were threatened by property management firms or developers. They were beaten. They were like having human waste poured in front of their doors. They even sometimes have have their locks like blocked with glue. So these are very, very bad situations, but they were very persistent because they believe that they can make a difference. They have the responsibility to protect their rights.
One example of this is a woman that I've been meeting with for a long, long time showed up at one of our recent meetings, really downcast. She began weeping during the meeting, and I asked her what was going on, and she began to tell me that when she was part of one of these protests, she came home and human waste was smeared all over her door. She cleaned that up. The next day she came and there was glue squirted into her locks. She had that repaired, and a few days later she came out and she was set upon by a gang of guys who beat her mercilessly, and she was in the hospital for 2 weeks. And other people around the table had been to visit her, and they said you wouldn't have recognized her. So, you know, it's that kind of situation.
So another dimension, another point is that many homeowners are trying to build a better and stronger community through their participation in HOAs. They have a very good vision and blueprint. They thought they can build neighborhood clinic. They can better connect people by funding many associations in their neighborhood. They also want to use public space to organize social activities so that their neighborhood can be better. So these homeowners are very positive and also very persistent. So
Here again, holding things like public.
yeah. So next, let's invite Weijie to present our larger implication.
Thank you. Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Weijie Wang. I'm a fourth-year doctoral student here. So this part talks about linking citizenship to governance. Whether these homeowners participate in order to protect their property rights. In this society that the relevant law and regulations are not there. So they're trying to participate for this reason. So we were interested in, do they participate only for this reason? So do they stop participating when their property rights are protected? So we were interested in this question before entering the field. We have shown that participation facilitates the citizenship among these homeowners. They develop stronger civic skills. They have more awareness of rights. So the question really becomes, so what? So that this have any implications for governance or even for civil society in China? There's this theoretical discussion about government is a function of citizenship. That maybe in some authoritarian states where government used to be suppressive. They suppress these people. They tax these people without giving them proper representation. And for some reason, people are not satisfied with the situation. So they began to claim more rights. They try to challenge the government. They redefine the boundary between government and the people. So we use this to illustrate this, this a crude illustration of this relationship. So in our case, is this also true? Is this emerging citizenship transform the local governance in China? What we found is this spillover effects of participation. We found that participation is really a political socializing process for these homeowners. They develop more skills. They have stronger awareness of rights. They have to deal with the governments and the property management firms constantly. So they become more familiar with local politics. They began to understand how political decisions are made in these governments. So they began to know when is the best time to put pressure on governments when these governments are not cooperative. How to put pressure on them. For example, in Beijing there's this annual National People's Congress thing in each March. It's politically sensitive at that time. All levels of governments are trying to maintain social stability. They don't want to see any protests at that time. Some frustrated but savvy homeowners will go to some local governments and tell them, okay, if you keep setting barriers, if you don't cooperating with us, we will go to the Tiananmen Square now to protest. So these local officials become very nervous. They may fear severe punishment from higher level of governments. So they have to give up, at least for that moment. Also, these rights spread to ordinary homeowners. Hui just shown that even the senior people whose daily job is taking care of their grandson now understands more about their property rights. So it's easier for these activists to mobilize a large number of homeowners if necessary. And they did this. So these homeowners are using a lot of ways to protect their rights. They raise lawsuits against governments and property management firms. They organize demonstrations and protests. We take this picture from the microblog of an HOA. These homeowners are protesting against the property management firm. This PMF is legally fired by these homeowners, but this PMF refused to leave. They just stay there. They occupy this neighborhood. So homeowners they cannot do anything about this except protesting. So this happens in China. The rule of law is not in place. So many strange things can happen. They are legally fired, but they refuse to leave. So homeowners are protesting against the PMF. So, yeah.
2 years ago, the government reported 69,000 incidents of social protest. If the government reported that many, you can probably assume there were a lot more. But it's not uncommon at all to protest against the maglev train going through Shanghai, all kinds of things. People emerge and begin to protest.
So what these homeowners found through these continuous movement is that their political rights and the property rights are intricately related. They cannot protect their property rights well without claiming and exercising their political rights. So they began to participate politically. So in some cases, they defeat government-supported candidates in the RC election. This is the only institutionalized election in China, actually. So, let's look at this case closely. This is the government organization chart in Beijing, 3 levels of governments: municipal level, district level, and then street level. So these residence committees, they are not a level of governments. They are supposed to be self-governing civic organizations. They should be elected by all the residents in a neighborhood. There are 2 ways of election. One is direct election, which is quite rare because the Communist Party is always nervous about these direct political participation. So the second way, indirect election, is the common way to do this. So residents first elect some representatives, 30 to 40 representatives. And then these representatives elect the RC, Residence Committee. So this is, the second way. It's much easier for the government to manipulate these indirect elections. They just need to secure a majority of these 30 to 40 representatives. These representatives are not really elected by these people because people don't pay attention. They don't care about this election. They know that it's manipulated. They know that their participation will not make a difference. So just let the government appoint some candidates as the representative and then elect a RC that, it works as a government, they use government lags. So in 3 of the 10 neighborhoods that we visited in last September, these homeowners became serious about this election because, the previous RC, Resident Committee, did not cooperate with them to protect their property rights. They even set a lot of barriers. So these homeowners decided that they need to elect one that can represent their interests, or at least cooperate with them. So they did a lot of work in mobilization. They mobilized homeowners to make sure that the homeowner activists can be elected as the representative. They secured a majority of these representatives. And then in the formal election, they defeated the government-supported candidates and elect one that can at least cooperate with them. So they began to claim and exercise their political rights. This political participation happens not only at the neighborhood level. They try to do it at a higher level. Some homeowners campaigned for the representative of a local People's Congress at the district level in Beijing. So it's at this level, they try to campaign for the representative of the People's Congress. This is not something fun. This is something risky. This can be seen as a direct challenge to government authority. In reality, almost all these representatives are, appointed in some way by these governments, and then through a fake election, they were legitimized. But these homeowners, they want to voice their concern at a higher level. So they began to campaign for these representatives. This is a picture, this is a campaign activity. So this guy, Mr. Du, from this neighborhood called Huilongguan, it's in the northern part of Beijing. He's running for this representative of local People's Congress. We interviewed 2 homeowners who campaigned for this representative. One of them was put on the government blacklist, become a sensitive person. So this Mrs. Zhang, she's a retired English teacher. She's a homeowner leader in her neighborhood. He tried to voice their concerns at a higher level, so that she participated in this election of local People's Congress. And of course, she failed. It's very difficult for these neighborhood leaders to be elected at the district level. But she questioned the government officials in a meeting. How can these people? Because eventually, at last, the people from some completely unrelated organizations become the representative of their neighborhood. So she questioned these government officials in a meeting. How can these people represent our community? How isn't it good to have one community from our neighborhood? At least we can voice our concerns. So she was defeated this time, but she told us that she would participate again in the next election of this People's Congress. And also, there are some people doing, advocacy. These homeowners in Beijing are organizing a federation of HOAs in Beijing. But, this is also politically sensitive. The government never approved. So they are working under the name of a preparatory group, right, of this federation of HOAs in Beijing. They organize an annual meeting of homeowners in Beijing each year. I think this year's meeting is going to be held in late April. So they're doing a lot of advocacy, actually. They influence municipal level government decision making. They offer their ideas and suggestions to these governments when they're making policies. But we don't know if the government really listens to them. But at least they have some channels. They're trying to organize. They're trying to become a stronger organization. So what we see here is really a
So,
Let me ask you. So in an election, are the results public? Like, can you see the results?
you cannot see. You can see who got elected, but you will never see who got the votes. Yeah, the number of
So
votes.
you'll never see the votes?
Never
No.
see the votes. No.
Because I was wondering, another way you could have, and maybe you can still do this, I don't know how you do it, but is to just measure the number of times that someone runs as a direct candidate,
Yeah.
right, and to see if that's increased over time.
Right. Right.
But in order to do that, you need to know
Yeah. Maybe
Who runs?
a larger project to do
what
that.
happened. But that's interesting.
if the Bedrosian Center would like to fund us to do that.
Yeah, but we'll talk about it.
That's great. So here, we see a process of redefining the boundary between governments and citizens here. Government used to be the sole center of decision making in these neighborhoods. So they have a lot of interests and stakes in this neighborhood. But now, organized homeowners are trying to claim their property rights, their political rights. They're challenging the government. They're trying to redefine this boundary, right? So how does government respond? They fight back in many cases. They don't want to see this organized homeowners. A strong presence of homeowners organization means reduce the influence of the government and their threat. Their interests are also threatened. So in many cases, they choose to be blind to homeowners' complaints. In some cases, they set a lot of barriers in homeowners organizing. And even when homeowners are established, they try to co-opt these HOAs in order to maintain their influence in these neighborhoods. So this is like a game between two parties, and the results of the game really redefines this boundary between government and citizens. We have many cases. In one case, these HOAs, when homeowners were trying to establish their HOA, it works very well. It went smoothly because there are some high-profile homeowners. They are government officials themselves. So local agencies decide to step back and let them organize. But at the beginning, the HOA works very well. But soon, these homeowners found that they need to devote a lot of time and energy in this HOA. They need to attend meetings. They need to manage neighborhood affairs. They need to manage their neighborhood communities. So they have full-time jobs. So they decide. So many of them began to participate less and less. So soon this HOA was not functional. And then at that time, government fights back. Government went back to their neighborhood and try to influence a lot of decision making in this neighborhood. So this gaming process is happening all the time. So what do we learn from these projects? Housing reform was designed to spin off some government burdens, right? In the late 1990s, the government was no longer to provide housing to the residents. So they created this real estate market to spin off some of the burdens. But one important and unintended consequence is the rise of homeowners as an important party in neighborhood governance. So through participation, these homeowners develop strong civic skills and awareness of rights, and they were no longer satisfied with their situation. So they began to organize and to claim their property rights and political rights. So this greatly changed how local governance is conducted in contemporary China. So this is encouraging because we found that in this context, in authoritarian states that does not have a democratic tradition, that does not have a favorable institutional environment, participation still produces some very positive outcomes. So we could imagine if this happens in a democracy, things might be even better. So does this have any long-term influences? So that can homeowners' participation facilitate the emergence of a civil society? Can it become a foundation for further political movements? Frankly, we don't know. Our project is a small one, so we don't have enough evidence to answer these two questions. But what we found is that it is becoming increasingly difficult for the authoritarian government to rule in the old way when they're facing these newly emerging citizens that have this strong skills and strong awareness of rights. And also, this HOA is a nationwide phenomenon. It's not only in Beijing, it's all over the country. So the long-term effects of these HOA movements remains to be observed. In terms of, future research, we will keep analyzing our existing evidence. We will, we just present part of our findings in this presentation. There are lots of other threats like the internal governance of these HOAs. Some due to the lack of proper monitoring, some HOA directors and board members become corrupted. They collude with property management firms to sell communal properties. They gain a lot from this. And also, we have scheduled a second trip in May. We will interview some government officials at the municipal level, and we will interview more HOA leaders to have a better understanding of this question. And I think that's all our presentation. So, any comments? And thank you. Yeah.
I've got a couple of questions. One is, is there anything you could compare those people with? In other words, they're becoming more sensitized to democracy and all. Can you compare that to people who are not in homeowners associations, but are in either nothing or in some other association? That's my first question. My second one is, my sense of American homeowners associations is that they've become very conservative and very territorial, and they certainly aren't the model for a lot of advocacy in the United States, except for people who want to protect their own property. Is there any evidence that that's their way of the ones that have been around for a longer period of time? In other words, have they kind of evolved into kind of, this is my property, my backyard, we'll fix this up, but we don't want to worry about anything else?
Yeah. Well, for the first question, we wish we could do that, to compare some neighborhoods that have no HOA and then they have, a neighborhood that has HOA. The comparison might be very good, to find out the real effects of participation. But we haven't done that yet. What we have done is to compare longitudinally, to see what these homeowners have gained through participation. So yeah, this would be a very good direction.
This project has been very, very difficult to fund, as you might suspect. We've talked with the Ford Foundation representative in Beijing, very interested. too sensitive. So it's very difficult to find funding because of its sensitivity.
The second question, yeah, sorry. Well, I think, yeah, in the U.S. there are lots of other ways for, for advocacy, for, political movements. But in China, there are not these channels. So these homeowners don't have other ways to influence politics. So that's why, we are focusing on HOA. This is one of the rare cases of self-governing civic organizations. There are some, non-profits in non-governmental organizations in China, but most of them are government controlled. So they name it GOCO, government organized non-government organization. So it's a strange name, but it reflects the reality there.
I guess another response would be that here, homeowners associations have clear property rights, but at the margin, they defend those. That's the conservatism you're talking about. Here, they're still trying to claim fundamental rights, which fits them in.
I guess my question was, once they do that, will they become like American ones and they're more territorially protective than they are generally advocating?
Two questions.
Who are you? And introduce yourself. This is one of our doctoral alumni.
Oh, okay. Yeah, my name is Terrence Harwick. I graduated from here once upon a time, worked for IPAC when it existed, the International Public Administration Center, where we had over 200 international students from around the world every semester. It's a very interesting time at USC. And I'm currently teaching at Cal Lutheran University, which is near my home. And this is my master's student who's working on a thesis related to homeowners in China. And I have two questions that occurred to me when doing the presentation. Did you look at the competing power interests behind some of the issues that Terry described there? Number one. And number two, in terms of, for example, the slide that you had that showed the people protesting and people wouldn't leave the management firm. If you looked at the competing tensions between land administrative law and property law and that impact on that sort of impasse in China.
You want to take this question? Well, yeah, maybe answer the second one first. Yeah, there are these property right law and the land law, all kinds of laws there, but they are very weakly enforced. Right? That's the problem.
There are also competing laws there. It's not just they're weakly enforced.
Right.
They say different things.
Yes.
Which goes to the adjudication question.
There is one property rights law, and there is nothing that we've been able to see that's in direct tension with that.
Oh, there is.
Except the government interest.
There's a law.
Yeah, there's a law. 2007, the People's National Congress adopted the first property rights law. It was began being implemented in October 2007. We have copies of that if you'd like to see.
No, I understood.
And so it's been poorly implemented.
Well, but it's in tension with the land administrative law of, I believe, 1999. And that's one of the dilemmas, is there is no natural place. You got this law saying this, you got that law saying that, so what do you do? And there's a tension within China in terms of, well, 1999 law, is it 1999? Is actually a special regulation which holds a higher legal standing. But the 2007 law you refer to is a more recent one. And there's current debate about that. Well, what should be higher? Special regulation, which was traditionally the highest, or recency, which is a current debate, which would go to 2007. But the 2007 law is kind of hung in limbo because of the 1999 law, even legally. And if you take it to court, some guys are going to review it in favor of 99, and some guys in favor of 2007. And there's no means of reconciling that today.
So the results have been mixed. Some people have won their suits and some have not.
Right. And behind that are different competing power interests, which goes to the first part of my question.
Yes.
For example, the feces, the glue, the beating up. I'm suspecting that had to do with people who had common law ownership interests in asserting that, or real estate folks who were tightly combined with them, were able to pay, somebody to pay for it. It didn't happen by accident.
Well, it's the developers who really own the property management firms who create sources of revenue by their ownership of the property management firms and bribe the government. So they generates a flow of revenue like the parking slots, and some of that gets kicked back to the developer. It's owned by the developer essentially.
Last question. Did you guys look into nail house issues at all?
No, that's a different problem. We've looked at, in our last trip, we saw a village that had just been demolished and people had been moved from it because there were no nail houses. That's a different problem.
I understand.
It's a property rights problem, but it's different.
Homeowners problem, but yeah, it's right.
The competing interest in laws is very common in China. So actually, I think government agencies try to remain the ambiguity of the law so that they can take advantage of this ambiguity.
Yes.
They can interpret it into different ways.
Well, they benefit tremendously from the prior law. So the longer they can hold ambiguity, the more they win.
Yes, that's right. That's right. So we have time for one.
I have a question. I want to know more information about the homeowner association. It's more related to the new commercial building or include some the relocation community like the Tiantongyuan. So the homeowner association, they are homogeneous or a lot of difference. And the question that is maybe different of course this depend on the building types or the location in Beijing.
Yes.
And so I want to know more about that. And I think the homeowner association, some are well organized, and for some of the rich or some of the people have the social power in Beijing.
Yes.
They can buy the house in the central Beijing. And I know you just interviewed one in the south area. So will you develop your research in some not well organized communities or some of the weak homeowner associations?
Yes.
So the next step of your research.
Where do you want to say something?
Yes, we were struggling with choosing our neighborhoods. So we intentionally choose some neighborhoods who have very strong homeowner association, and also those who have which have very weak association. Like in Rongfeng neighborhood, it's the second ring of Beijing. They have over 5,000 households in the neighborhood. So it's extremely difficult for them to organize their HOA. And also they face very strong resistance from government. So this is the very, very typical case of weakly developed HOA. We do have many good HOAs like the Daxiyang neighborhood. They are very cohesive in their organization.
That's, I think, that's a quite typical collective action problem, right? Homeowners is not homogeneous. There's a lot of heterogeneity there. You know, they have different income, different backgrounds, different education. So it's very difficult to organize. If you consider the size of the neighborhood, 5,000 households. It's almost as big as South Pasadena here, right? And larger than South Pasadena. So it's very difficult for these homeowners to organize. That's a very typical problem. That's why homeowners are having so many difficulties to organize themselves.
Yes.
Imagine 20, 30-story buildings.
Yep. So I think our time is up, right?
Are there any other questions?
Yeah. Any other questions?
We could go longer, so don't feel they're in the house.
Excuse me,
Yeah,
I have
sure.
two questions. How do you connect the non-government community to your theory of governance?
Can you repeat that?
Does you connect it with the non-government community to your theory of governance?
You mean how to connect these HOAs to governance, homeowners organization?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think the government used to make all the decisions in the neighborhood, right? They take care of everything, social welfare, even neighborhood safety, all kinds of things. But in these commercialized new neighborhoods, these homeowners, lots of things are about property rights, right? Like, they hire their property management firm. This firm take care of the safety and all kinds of things. So there are multiple players in the neighborhoods. It's not only government. There are these HOAs, there are developers, property management firms. So different parties, so there's a real transformation from government to governance at these in urban China, in these neighborhoods. So it's no longer government taking care of everything.
Yeah, the second question for me is I just thought about the community with civil society. What's the difference between it's the non-government community? So that's is that through civil society or is kind of an unofficial civil society?
Yeah, well, I think these HOAs, I would say it's part of the unofficial civil society, right? It's not, they are self-governing civic organizations. There are quite very few these self-governing organizations. So I think they're part of the unofficial civil society. It's not the government-controlled non-profits or non-government organizations.
Can you say now China has the civil society?
Wow.
Yes. That's not a question that we can answer. There are competing arguments there. I don't know.
I think one of the interesting things to me has been to discover that a lot of the people who are in the leadership of these HOAs have roots that go back to Tiananmen Square.
Right.
Here we are sitting in one of the over dinner with a group of 15 or so of these HOA leaders. The guy sitting to my left was the bodyguard for the woman who organized the Tiananmen Square demonstrations. So they began to learn some skills of organizing way back then that had been passed on in this whole HOA process. So
Many of them have always been a troublemaker to the government. They have been doing this for a long time, since the 1989.
And some of them are now becoming professional consultants to HOAs to help them learn how to organize, how to run meetings.
What's the source
of order? What?
What is the source of revenue for the HOAs? Is it all by the members, or do they get a government stipend?
No, there are no government stipends. It's, in some successful cases, when they are organized, they get some income from this property management firm. They have to, give them the funding for their activity. So when some owners are organizing themselves, there's a lot of financial difficulty for them. Sometimes they rely on donations from these homeowners. Sometimes the organizers have to pay by themselves. These 10 people they're organizing, so let's pay, like 1,000 each time, and they're doing this they're trying.
As is not unusual in any social movement like this, these are not the poorest people in China. I mean, most of these people are very well organized, very well educated and have some means. That's why the government is reluctant to move in with too harsh a hand on them. I sat in another meeting, I sat with a man who was 80 years old, and he began to tell me his story. He said, I learned English by watching American TV videos, and that sort of thing. And he said, I want you to know my history. I marched into Tiananmen Square with Mao. I fought in an armed revolution to create a communist society. I'm proud of that. And I've been working all my life to build a communist society, and I'm proud of that. I rose to be the director of one of the main committees of the People's National Congress. Now I'm working with the HOA leaders as a homeowner myself to build a democratic society, and I'm proud of that. So, there are people involved in this movement who have some means of their own, both the kind of knowledge resources and skills, as well as some money. And that's not unusual in, revolutions are not led by the poor.
Okay. Yeah. Any other questions?
This is a real quick one. So I wonder, is this phenomenon happening to more newly developed community, or does it matter about a year? Because I would suppose the regulation would be ambiguous in the earlier years that before 2007.
Mm-hmm.
So is this the case, or?
I think it's, these homeowners, they're mostly in the commercialized neighborhoods. After 1998, there's this commercialized development, right? So these HOAs are mainly in these neighborhoods. It's not in the old public housing neighborhoods. There are lots of such kind of neighborhoods in Beijing. So these are new in that it's in the commercialized neighborhoods, not the public housing neighborhoods.
There's something else to answer this question about the prior laws. It's not that the ambiguity was in the prior laws. The ambiguity exists because of the 2007 law. So the earlier law was much more top-down oriented. There are, in terms of traditional notions of common ownership under Mao. The property law was passed under Deng's influence. Never mind, he was dead. It was passed under his influence, and that emphasized private property rights. And so today's ambiguity is that two of these are in existence, and they directly conflict, and in many instances. And so the question is, what then? And that's the challenge China's living through right now.
Thank you.
Okay. I think this. Oh yeah, please.
Quick question. So I'm curious about the chart we presented for the community prices. Is that price in yuan? Right?
U.S. dollar.
In US dollars. That's very expensive.
Okay. And do you know what is the median or the average housing price in Beijing? I know it's big, but I'm just curious.
Now I think it's about 30,000 yuan. It's
yeah.
like 5,000 US dollars per square meter.
Yeah.
Dollars, yeah, per square meter. Yeah,
Meter.
well, that
Yeah.
transition. Yeah, so it's always measured in square meters.
Yeah.
So,
I couldn't afford to buy a housing if I go back to China.
Yeah, no, that ratio is interesting. It's the ratio of housing price to median household income. In LA it's about 10 to 1, but in Beijing it's over 30 to 1. So there's, I think there's no way for young professionals to buy an apartment in Beijing. There's no way. It's just
And can you also talk more about on how you select cases and how you approach them, like by calling or?
Ah.
Yeah.
So we have connection with the professor in Renmin University.
Professor Chen.
Yeah, so we visited her, and then she introduced some neighborhoods to us. So we we visited their neighborhoods, talked to their homeowner leaders, and then after the interview, we said, could you introduce some more neighborhoods that you think is typical, or we want to interview these kinds of neighborhoods. Could you introduce some to us? So we actually visited their neighborhoods. So it's very intense for us to interview 10 or 12 interviewees in 8 days.
Were they happy to talk to you guys?
Yes,
Oh.
yes.
I think, the personal connections, played some role there.
Yeah.
If it's complete strange people, I don't think they are willing to talk to us. But we have some connections, so that's why they talk to us about
One of the
this.
problems that Feng encountered in her dissertation and we're facing now is you cannot do efficient interviewing. You go there and people are so eager to talk that it's like a visit. It goes on and on
Yeah.
over some tea or whatever, and it
Yeah.
goes on and on and on. They have all these stories they want to tell you.
Yes, very talkative.
Anything else? Well, I wanted to thank you guys for a very interesting presentation.